Welcome back to the Power of You Summit. I am your host, Phyllis King, and today our expert and someone I'm very pleased to be speaking with is Swami Asha. Asha has been a mentor of mine for many years and also a friend. She was a spiritual director for Ananda Worldwide for many decades. Now she travels around the world spreading information about self-realization from the viewpoints of Swamiji, who was a direct disciple of the Paramhansa Yogananda. She has dedicated her life to these teachings. She's an author many times over, and enough really can't be said about her wit and her wisdom. And Asha, I thank you so much for taking time to be here today. And I know before we started our interview, we got going on a whole spontaneous conversation about relationships. And so perhaps we could pick up from that point about what we were talking about relationships in this point in time.
We're in an enormous transition period between the materialistic age of Kali Yuga and the rising age of energy, Dwapara Yuga. This is the Indian way of describing it. You don't have to have any context, you just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear to see that everything is changing, and everything is changing so fast that whereas for most of the generations before us there was a certain reliability about just even fundamental social systems. I mean, speaking from the last 100 years, it's really begun to shift. But therefore, what happens to all of us as individuals is that we are able to live so many different lifetimes in a very short span of time because change is so accessible and change is constantly being imposed upon us. I mean, I think of small things like there was this Indian family, as it were, who ran a little shop where they developed film. And they were immigrants and they'd established themselves well. They ran a really nice business. Of course, it's totally evaporated. It's just absolutely gone because nobody uses film in a camera anymore. They all now, everything is digital. So their whole business just disappeared. I was reading about a breakthrough in artificial intelligence that would allow cancer cells to be perceived that the computer would look at the slide sample instead of the human being looking at the slide sample. You know, a whole nother trained profession just goes out the window. People have their life all planned, and then pretty soon it's gone. And then we also get exposed to things that we would never have been exposed to. I don't mean inoculated or infected. Right. We have the opportunity to travel, to consider professions that were never there, to be on the front end of something completely new that's developing. Businesses are global, travel is so simple, all of which puts an extraordinary strain on human relationships, just unprecedented strain. So it's like the karma of several generations here, in which all the normal supportive realities for human relationships and human love have basically been stripped away. They've just been completely taken off the table. And yet we haven't changed. We still have the same basic needs and the same basic desires, but it's like a high wire act. You know, it used to be that you lived in the same town, you had the same friends, you had your generational family, and because we're talking about a primary partnership, a love partnership, it only very recently did that love partnership have to bear the burden virtually of our entire need for human intimacy. Before, it's like your husband or your wife was in the context of your mother, your father, your aunts, your uncles, your siblings, your nieces, your nephews. And so that relationship could give you what it could give you but it didn't break because it couldn't give you everything.
Mhm.
So an enormous amount of the problem, I think, is that we are asking of these intimate love relationships something that is very, very rare and very hard to come by, which is a level of capacity to fulfill each other's emotional needs that is very hard for any two people to do for each other.
Mm.
So there's about, 100 strikes against us before we begin. Also, we don't have a very sacred attitude towards sexuality anymore, and that's putting it mildly. We have a very self-indulgent attitude or self-fulfillment attitude. Now, everything I say that's a limitation, it's also a plus. I'm describing these conditions, but I'm not necessarily saying that they're a step down. They just are the reality that we're working with, and we haven't really adjusted to that reality. Sexuality is easily accessible to most adults, not prostitutes, you don't have to demean yourself. It's just sexual partnerships are just part of the story. So that was a huge incentive to hold relationships together. I have a very realistic attitude about the importance of sexuality in intimate relationships, and that used to be a unique feature that would also hold people together. That is also, it's still, of course, part of the story, but conditions under which sexual fulfillment is possible are, again, all the walls are down. And so everybody can go everywhere. Plus, on the other side of it, our whole society is so sexualized that the understanding of the balanced role of sexuality in adult relationships, it's very confused. It's exceedingly distorted. And sexuality comes in very early, before people even know each other. Then they get to know each other, and there's this sense of great exposure and intimacy, but you're really still working with a stranger because it takes a long time. Again, all of these things are enormous impersonal challenges that we're all having to work with. And nonetheless, even from a spiritual point of view, especially from a spiritual point of view, we must learn to be unselfish. That's what spirituality is that we are able to be generous with our own needs in order to help other people grow in the way that they need to grow. I don't mean that we should be inappropriately generous, but we need to learn how to love. And love is more about giving in a balanced way than it is about keeping score and making sure I'm getting what I want. And we tend to be very afraid of those lessons. So we're made in such a way that we desire partnership, we desire children, and all of those things force us to expand our sense of the possible. And when everything goes right, which is not always by any means, we get to grow. So it's still required, but we have to catch up to the realities of what we're dealing with. And I mean, we have to add also the fact that women are not dependent on men. When we're dealing with heterosexual relationships, women are not dependent on men. And therefore, everybody has to step up to the plate in ways that we really don't know. And nobody can teach us. So it's pretty much of a chaos zone right now, is what I've seen. And there's no stigma on divorce. So that's the good news, and that's the bad news. The good news about that is you don't get wrapped up in something for your whole life that is of zero benefit to you on any level. A person can simply walk away, and that's the good news. The bad news is it takes a lot more time and a lot more effort to really build a deep relationship. And when the door is always half open, many times it's just easier to walk away from it. And so we're also not compelled to grow sometimes. We grow in other ways for other reasons, but we don't have to stick it out in the way that people did before. Now, a lot of times sticking it out, as I say, was just as often bad as good. Every single thing I'm saying has two sides to it. But what I'm saying is, let's not take this personally. That we are in a maelstrom of confusion, and we're a transition generations here. And these transition generations are going to have to suffer a lot until we figure it out. Swami Kriyananda said to me once, we have to raise the children completely with a completely different understanding. He says it takes several generations to straighten it out, because we haven't even begun to raise the children with a deeper understanding of themselves, of their place in the world, how to work with energy, of where sex comes into it, of how to truly love. We're just teaching children to get high test scores and get high-paying jobs. I mean, how much energy, think about it. It gives just zero energy to really teaching young people the values that will make the difference when they become adults. I mean, this is the big joke about education, that adults realize that their happiness comes from sources that were never, ever, ever mentioned in all of their years of education. Like, this is kind of dumb. And especially, since we're having to reinvent this, we're having to re-explore, recreate, come to peace with all of these changing realities. Men and women, especially, and gay relationships are a whole nother story about which I know less, but everybody's just having to figure out, who are we? Where do we belong? And that's the good news. Because it's all about personal growth and all about personal responsibility. It's all about self-understanding. It's not about just getting our comfortable niche and settling down into it, and you have to behave this way and I behave this way. We're not necessarily happy, but at least we're not broken and afraid. But that's not necessarily a good life. It's just a life in which there's no change. So having said all of that, we just have to start over. We have to start over. What am I looking for? What do I need? Where does it fit? And in this particular age, I think we have to be satisfied with realizing we're not going to, much of what we want out of life is not going to come, because it's just like that. So we have to learn whatever it is that God is trying to teach us with what the circumstances. The fundamental problem, and I'll skip right to the end, is that we don't see ourselves as part of a greater reality. We don't understand that our lives are really being guided from superconscious divinity. And that balancing line between what I think I need, how I focus my mind to achieve it, and surrender to the fact that there are forces acting on my life from a higher plane that I might not even understand. So everything that comes to me is for my own greater good. How do I really apply that, to friendship, to love relationships? All I've done is outline the problems, of course. I haven't said anything about solutions, but that's a whole big other story. But whenever somebody comes and talks to me about struggles they have in relationships, I say, well, welcome to this plane at this time. I think it'll get better, but I don't know if it'll get better. Better meaning, well, it's so confusing to me. I know so many single people who are so longing for a loving relationship. And it seems like they could match themselves up more easily. Yeah, you would just think they could. But they don't. It doesn't seem to be in the cards for it to happen. Not that it won't happen, but that it's not as clear cut as it has been in other times, where your parents would arrange what would much of the time be a wonderful life for you, but then you'd live that life in the context of your whole family. So what you needed from your partner was very different.
Yeah.
It's the best I could say.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, all that actually makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, yeah, I can see all those pieces fitting together in the greater landscape. Is it easier when we're younger, or we're just less aware, and so we rush into things? Or is it really just the state of where life is right now? But a lot of people say that to me. Why do I have to do all this inner work? It's like when I was younger, I just meet somebody and we'd get together and it would,
Yeah, but then, of course, are they still with that person, and how did it
No.
work? Yeah, I mean, so you could have lots of experiences. My own point of view is that the sexual drive is so powerful when you're younger, and as I've said, the walls are down. So you can have a lot more relationships that will last a while, and that usually the sexual energy will hold you together for a long time. And then as you get to know each other on a deeper level, you may find great incompatibilities that were balanced, by the physical attraction. I think you have people, I think in this age, and it's, as I say, it stretches over a number of generations. One of my informal things is that everybody has a quota of misery that they just have to go through, and you're going to get it one way or another. You're going to get it because you are married. You're going to get it because you're not married. You're going to get it because you have children, or you're going to get it because you don't have children. And you can just go down that list. But there's going to be a quota of misery that will wake you up to deeper realities and deeper powers within yourself. And for some reason, most of us don't learn unless we hurt. Hurt is a tremendous motivator. Yeah. So one way or another, that hurt comes to us. And when that hurt comes to us, it forces us to think more deeply. I think it's a terrible system. Apparently Yogananda thought it was a terrible system. He prayed, Divine Mother, why must you teach your children through suffering? If we're open-minded, most of us are willing to say that the hardest times taught us the most important lessons. And I wish I didn't have to say that. I would prefer not to have to say that, but I do. I don't like it. I'm with Yogananda. I heartily disapprove.
So as it pertains to loving God, we've touched on that. And in my view, the view that I currently hold, I feel like I do that, but maybe I'm not, because I feel like I'm aspiring to the highest that I can, that I'm helping people find their highest at any time, listen to higher self, and that somehow honors. Is that the same as loving God, or is there more?
I think we divide the world up into too many pieces when we start talking spiritually.
Oh, okay.
Loving God means to expand beyond our self-interest and make the welfare of everything else important to us and give our energy to it. It means allowing divine creativity to flow through us. It means being aware at all times of the presence of hope and of joy. And after that, it's like we all have very practical lives to lead. God gives us, he sets it up in such a way that most of our time is concerned with mundane things. And so to love God is to live in such a way that we are, as much as possible, an uplifting influence. And that can be, you can do that as a hermit, because the vibrations that we put out affect the overall consciousness of the planet. So one doesn't have to be an interaction, one doesn't have to produce anything, because it's really our consciousness that is what matters, the vibration of consciousness on which we live. And most of us, however, have to practice and learn and train to have a high vibration in practical ways. So how we do everything becomes our definition of, to love God is to give. You know, that's what is, and so therefore we need to just be in a state of giving, and the state of how can I serve, and whether, you know, we're serving a kitten or a rose bush or a friend or a stranger who needs our help. From our point of view, it's always, how can I give? So we talk about loving God, but being like on the wavelength of the divine is in some ways a better way of thinking about it. You know, because I'm a disciple of a line of gurus, and because I was highly trained by Swami Kriyananda, who was a personal friend for more than 40 years, I have a picture in my mind that's a very human picture of what it looks like to always be thinking, how can I help? And when I say love God, it's a bit abstract to me. But when I think, how can I help? I can not only use my common sense, but I can use the stories I know about every saint I've ever read or heard about, and the life experiences I had with Swami. He was just always thinking of how to be helpful to other people. But at the same time, he was very, very natural, just completely natural, and you know, had his preferences for breakfast and his favorite restaurants and books he liked to read, and you know, it's just places we would go. It was perfectly natural, but the undercurrent was not, what can I get for myself? But it was always, how can I help? What can I give? There's another set of teaching that I think really helps the most. In the Indian context, they talk about 8 manifestations of the divine. And it's love, peace, joy, calmness, power, wisdom, divine light, divine sound. Now, I've given long workshops on the 8 manifestations of God. But when we talk about loving God, we're talking about being in the flow of the divine. And those 8 qualities actually really give you a very specific way to work. For example, sometimes you don't feel very happy, but you can still put out energy. You know, sometimes you don't have much energy, but at least then you can be peaceful. Sometimes things are completely frantic. There's no peace anywhere, but at least you can be calm. And so what I found with those 8 manifestations is I can always find a way to move myself closer to one of those vibrations. And love is one of them. And love comes easily to me, but not as easily as some of the others. Joy comes easier. Just pure energy comes easier. I forgot to say wisdom. Maybe I did say wisdom. Wisdom comes easier in the sense that I can remember the principles. I can't always follow them, but at least I can remember the principles that are applicable here. Run names, Padre Pio and others, they all talked about it. You don't have to be a prophet to see that the civilization as a whole is tremendously out of balance. And if you listen to the popular music and look at what people call art, you can see that there's so much dissonance and so little harmony. And music especially, it reflects the consciousness and it also creates it. And it just appears, and we are also in a transition from the age of matter to the age of energy, and these transitions are not smooth. Exactly what we see around us is this rigid holding on to separateness, and you know, it comes out as racism and religious sectarianism and excessive nationalism, that just like, you know, and gender roles and all of these things is fierce. We want it to be the same as it always was, and we want to draw a circle around ourselves. And then simultaneously, you have this tremendous force that's making all that impossible. Globalization and scientific understandings and crosses, cultures crossing, and races and ethnicities just mixing. So we're on a collision course. And Yogananda predicted, those are the ones I'm most familiar with, multiple war and economic collapse and earth change, huge earth change. Swami Kriyananda reiterated those. It's been part of my life that I've always known. However, it won't be destroyed. Much will be destroyed, but civilization won't be destroyed and the planet won't be destroyed. It'll be readjusted. Mm-hmm. And the whole purpose is to bring people back to an understanding of our relationship to a greater reality, mm-hmm. is to bring us closer to our spiritual divine selves. Yogananda said about America, we'll have much less money and be much happier. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can all feel that we're on a runaway train, mm-hmm. but it's hard collectively to stop it. Mm-hmm. Mother Mary in Medjugorje, said, because there has been a deep response to her message, one of the predicted catastrophes has already been averted because people are learning the lesson that the catastrophe was meant to teach. Swamiji and others have said that there's too much momentum going toward conflict for it all to be averted. But our role in it, and I would say our is anybody who would be listening to you, recognizes that, oh no, we can just attune ourselves to a higher, finer vibration, and then we're ahead of the wave, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And the end result, all of the masters say, is that there will be a period of conflict and great confusion, but many people will turn to higher values. And when it's over, there will be a very different world mm-hmm. civilization at that point. Mm-hmm. Yogananda said, the world sick to death of war and violence will enter into an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity that will last for several hundred years. Mm. And in many ways, Yogananda said, all of us who are standing with the light, and especially those who serve the light, will thrive during this period of time. Mm. Because as the shadow increases, there will be a greater call for the light. Mm-hmm. And many people will be called to the light and will be looking for those who can help them. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually very optimistic, extremely positive, and very impressed with the expanding light. But shadow is created when there's a lot of light. Mm. And there's a lot of, the only word I can use is evil. There's a lot of evil in the world right now. And so those of us who stand with the light have to be very, very strong in it.
Is there anything else that I missed to ask about, just in the flow of energy we have right now? Is there anything you want to share, say, ask, offer, tell?
I guess I want to go back to, I have had a tendency to be very aware of shadow. And I've really, on a very, very deep level, come to feel the power of all of those of us. And it's just, it doesn't matter where you are, how you form it, but those of us who were born to spread the light. And there are people who were born here to spread darkness and cause chaos, but there's more of us, I think. Or in the end, there's more power with us. Because darkness just eventually tears itself to bits. And then the light still remains. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to have an opportunity to get very deep and very strong. And I'm very grateful for that.
Well, when I look at the world through your perspective and eyes, I always feel so reassured and quite empowered. And I think it's perfect for this Power of You Summit. And I just thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I know you're a global traveler at this time, always all over the place right now, which is something you probably didn't expect even 4 or 5 years ago. But I'm grateful that you're out there doing the work of self-realization and allowing people to hear these perspectives. And of course, your website is ashajoy.org. You're also on Instagram, and you have this wonderful weekly question and answer thing that I subscribe to, which I find enormously helpful. And I've got lots of stories and things that are out on Facebook, and I even see you on TikTok from time to time. And you have an incredible YouTube channel with many classes. And, you know, when we talk about the 8 manifestations of loving God, that's on the YouTube channel as well, all of your long form content. But again, thank you so much for being here. And thanks everyone for listening today and for tuning into the Power of You Summit. And we'll have another expert tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.